Constantine Sergeyevich was a widower. When he buried his wife, Abdokyo Nicolevnu, the ground literally fell from under his feet. He was left alone. All his life, he and his wife lived for themselves. She didn't want children. She didn't want to fall out of life and be bound hand and foot. She was afraid of responsibility, she told him. Was it wrong to enjoy each other's company, to travel, to visit new places? They were easygoing and visit different cities with full immersion, which meant renting a flat and starting to live there. Sometimes a couple of months were enough. More often, they stayed for half a year in a couple of places. They even stayed for 2 years. Could they afford this kind of entertainment if they were burdened with children? Of course not. Kids need school. They have friends. No one would agree to lug around the country following a crazy mom and dad. Still, somewhere after 35, Constantine insisted that he and his wife get a checkup from a doctor. They both underwent tests, and she met him at the door of the clinic in tears, with shaking hands, clutching a file in her hands. "You know, Costa, I want to tell you that you can be absolutely free. I just don't have the right," she said, almost stammering through her sobs. "What's wrong?" Kostya didn't understand. "I can't give you a baby," she mouthed and turned away. "Let it go," said Constantine. He put his arm around his wife's shoulders, and they did not return to this conversation. They simply lived and enjoyed life. When Abdokyo was a few years away from retirement, she suddenly started coughing. Constantine was always very sensitive about her health, and after that checkup, probably a simple allergy. Maybe the flat they rented this time had a cat or a dog around, although she hadn't noticed having any allergies to animals before. They were back in their hometown and at their home where no one kept any animals, and she kept coughing. Constantine insisted to visit a hospital. The doctor shook his head and held his hands apart. There was nothing they could do. How could it be? It's just a cough. Ivanka blinked her eyes incomprehensibly. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Sarcoma. It was always fatal. They had caught it too late. It had developed too quickly. At the funeral, Kostya sat alone at home, not knowing what to do next, how to live. He had no one and nothing left. What kind of journeys could he take now? What did he need them for? Now he was much older than Avdotia, so he was already retired, now only a lonely retirement. A few days later, he was going through the papers, and suddenly he found the same yellow folder that his wife had clutched in her hands. When she found out she couldn't be a mother, he hadn't even looked inside. Strange. Why had she kept it? After all, it was clear she could have thrown those tests away just for the sake of curiosity. Constantine Sergeyevich looked inside. To say he was shocked was not to say anything. It wasn't Abdokyo who was barren. It was he who was barren. At first, he felt bitterly resentful of her. What a liar. What an actress. How thoughtfully played everything and wept so naturally. Then came to the realization that Abdokyo had laid her whole life, her right to be a mother, on the altar of his happiness and marital well-being. If only she had spoken to him, then maybe they would have found another solution. After all, they could adopt or try artificial insemination. And only later, Constantine realized that it couldn't have been any other way. There would be nothing artificial and no adoption. Abdokyo had not wanted to have children for a long time before the checkup. She had seized on the results as an opportunity to rid herself of the problem. So she was driven by selfishness. You cannot go against nature, against her nature, for which if Abdokyo had punished by God and diagnosed with a fatal disease. When Constantine realized it, he forgave her. Now he went to her cemetery almost every day, watered the flowers, wiped the monument. He found a strange pleasure in this. For hours, he would sit on the bench and talk to her. At first, Constantine Sergeyevich thought he was talking to Abdokyo. Then he realized he was just talking to himself. It was only at that moment that he seemed to let go. He stopped being sad, stopped pining. He simply accepted reality. As it was, he realized that he was actually happy. He was happy with what he had. One day, he took another stroll through the cemetery. Now he no longer lingered at Avdokya's grave, walking along there like a museum. He was viewing the monuments and reading the tombstones, imagining what these people might have been like. Constantine Sergeyevich had no friends alive. All his friends were here now. That day, he stopped by one of the fresh graves. Usually, they were littered with wreaths from relatives and grieving friends. This one had nothing on it, just some flaccid tulip, a wooden cross, and a name and surname inscribed in pencil, not even a date. Claudia Tarakanova, Hello, Claudia. I wonder who you are, how old you are. Welcome to our graveyard, new friend, thought Constantine to himself. Suddenly he heard a squeak from the ground. At first he didn't understand what it was or where it came from. Maybe a kitten. Constantine looked around. No one was there. The squeak came directly from under the ground, from that very fresh grave. Looking around again, he saw an abandoned or forgotten shovel nearby. The man grabbed it and started digging up the grave. The squeaking sounded louder and louder. It was already turning into wailing. The crying was obviously from a child. Who are you? Having dug out the coffin, Constantine threw back the lid. The picture he saw was horrible. In the coffin was the old woman. Obviously, it was that Claudia was lying on either side were two newborn babies, a boy and a girl. The boy was barely breathing. The girl was crying. Girls are always the survivors, fighting to the end to survive, all for the sake of the continuation of the human race. Constantine went to the police. The children were taken temporarily to a shelter. The old woman in the coffin turned out to be Claudia Tarakanova. The old woman was quite well known in the neighborhood. The policeman confirmed that she had recently passed. But what about the children? The thing is, Claudia was known for her granddaughter. She raised Milana on her own. Claudia's daughter passed away in childbirth. The girl had no father. It was a hell of a family. Everyone thought Claudia would send her to an orphanage, but no, she took Milana and raised her on her own. Well, as best she could, she raised her. Milana became an exact copy of her mother, not only in appearance, but also in behavior. Pretty soon, she was going out with boys and then men. Milana became pregnant. Claudia was having a hard time with her second failure in raising the girl. She was already sick. Claudia died. Milana was at home at the time. Suddenly, her water broke. Just as Claudia passed away, Milana gave birth to twins. What was she going to do with them? She didn't need them. And then her grandmother relieved her of her responsibilities. Melania didn't have much money. She barely had enough for the cheapest coffin and diggers. That's why there was only one tulip on the grave. On the day of the funeral, Melania had the wisest idea how to get rid of the children unobtrusively. She put them there and they were buried on the same day. Milana rushed to Moscow for a new life. Constantine Sergeyevich could not comprehend what happened. He couldn't forget the twins and kept visiting them in the orphanage. One day, the nurse said, "Why don't you take them?" She was just voicing thoughts that had been going through Constantine's mind for a long time. After a checkup to make sure he was healthy enough to raise the children, Constantine took custody of them. The only strange thing was that his barrenness was not confirmed. He was doing just fine. Apparently, this mystery would remain in the past life with Abdokyo. Maybe it was a doctor's mistake. Maybe some kind of game she was playing. Constantine thought no more about it. Now he had two beautiful children. Milana never appeared in his life. Kostya stopped going to the cemetery. Now he walked to the children's playground.